On Sunday night, Gleason had been at it for hours. A lighting technician who worked on multiple the 7 most high guests Ed Sullivan ever had. Every Sunday night at 8 o'clock, 50 million Americans sat down in their living rooms to watch the Ed Sullivan Show. Music, and for 23 years, it remained the most wholesome hour on American television. Families gathered around the television, grandparents next to grandchildren, while Ed Sullivan stood on that stage in Studio 50 on Broadway. Music, wearing his stiff dark suit with his face locked in that famous stone expression. Introducing America to the greatest entertainers in the world. This was the show parents trusted. The show that built careers overnight and ended them just as fast. What those 50 million viewers never realized was that some of the biggest names who performed on that stage were not entirely in control of themselves when they stepped into the spotlight. And the Ed Sullivan Show was broadcast completely live with no tape delay, no second take, and no editing of any kind. Whatever happened on that stage traveled directly into 50 million living rooms in real time, which meant that if a performer slurred a lyric or stared into the spotlight like they were seeing something nobody else could see, America watched it happen at the exact moment it happened. Sullivan rarely drank and expected absolute professionalism from everyone on his stage. But even he could not control what performers did before they walked out under those lights. And what some of them did would have shocked the families who believed their Sunday night entertainment was as clean as the show pretended to be. The most alarming case involved a rock legend who walked onto Sullivan's stage with his eyes completely vacant and sang the one lyric he had been explicitly forbidden from singing on live television. Then there was the blues rock queen who delivered one of the rawest sets the show had ever broadcast while running on whiskey and whatever else she had consumed before the cameras went live. These are the 7 most high guests Ed Sullivan ever had. Number 7. Elvis Presley, the king whose secret dependency started before anyone noticed. 60 million viewers tuned in when Elvis Presley appeared on The Ed Sullivan Show in 1956. Music, making it the largest single audience in television history at that time. And Sullivan famously showed him only from the waist up because his hip movements were considered too provocative for a family audience. What nobody was paying attention to because the entire country was focused on those hips was what was happening behind those electric eyes. Elvis's relationship with pills started earlier than most people realize. And by the time of his Sullivan appearances, he was already developing a dependency that his personal physician would feed for the next 2 decades. Those pills gave him energy for the relentless touring schedule that Colonel Tom Parker demanded. And they helped him sleep when the energy refused to shut off, which created a cycle that slowly tightened around him until there was no version of Elvis Presley that existed without chemical assistance. All 3 of his Sullivan appearances in 1956 and 1957 came early enough in his dependency that the signs were not obvious to the average viewer. But people who worked closely with him backstage noticed things that the cameras never picked up. A member of the Sullivan production crew recalled years later that Elvis was wired in a way that went beyond natural excitement, saying his energy felt extraordinary, almost supernatural, and that he could not stop moving, could not stop talking, could not sit still for more than a few seconds at a time. At the time, everyone assumed it was just a young man thrilled to be on the biggest stage in America. But looking back with everything we know now, the signs were already there. Sullivan praised Elvis publicly at the end of his final appearance, telling the audience that Elvis was a real decent, fine boy. But backstage, he reportedly expressed a very different view. According to crew members, Sullivan told a colleague after one of the performances that something about that boy was not right and that his energy felt artificial rather than natural. The tragedy of those Sullivan appearances is that they captured a young man at the beginning of a dependency that would eventually consume him. And the energy that revolutionized television in 1956 would contribute to his death in Memphis 21 years later at the age of 42. Sullivan's stage saw the king at his absolute peak, and it also saw the first cracks in a foundation that was already beginning to crumble. Number 6. Jackie Gleason, the great one with the great thirst. Jackie Gleason's portrayal of Ralph Creighton in The Honeymooners turned him into a household name, and his own variety show cemented him as a television institution. Sullivan's stage featured him multiple times. Music, throughout the 1950s and 1960s, where he commanded the spotlight with the oversized personality that made him one of the biggest stars in the history of the medium. What the audience at home could never see was the state Gleason was in before he walked out under those lights. Because according to crew members who worked on Sullivan's show, Leon's drinking was legendary, even by the generous standards of 1950s show business. Music. He would start drinking early in the afternoon and maintain a steady pace straight through rehearsal, which meant that by the time the show went live at 8 o'clock, Sullivan broadcasts featuring Gleason described the strange effect it had on the man, explaining that Jackie did not get impaired the way regular people do. Regular people lose coordination, slur their words, and fall down. But Jackie got louder, funnier, and more unpredictable with every glass. And the result was not a man slowing down, but a man accelerating, which was terrifying when you were running a live television show timed to the second. Nearly an entire bottle would disappear between rehearsal and the live broadcast. But somehow when Sullivan called his name, Gleason delivered every single time. He hit his marks. He landed his jokes. And he gave the audience what they came to see. Sullivan tolerated Gleason's condition for one simple reason, which was that the man never visibly failed on stage. Backstage, the signs were obvious, including the flushed face, the slightly too loud voice, and the physical comedy that went further than anything they had rehearsed. But on camera, Gleason was magic. And as long as the magic held, Sullivan kept booking him. A stage manager recalled watching Sullivan from behind the curtain before Gleason's appearances and seeing Ed holding his breath because he knew Jackie had been drinking, and everyone knew. But Jackie never once gave Ed a reason to ban him. Number 5. Jerry Lee Lewis. The killer who set the stage on fire in more ways than one. When Jerry Lee Lewis appeared on the Ed Sullivan Show, America saw the wildest performer rock and roll had ever produced, with his piano playing violent and beautiful at the same time, his feet kicking the bench away, his hands crashing down on the keys, and his entire body in constant motion that made Little Richard look restrained by comparison. What America was actually watching, according to people who were backstage, was a man fueled by a combination of substances that would have put most people in a hospital bed. Lewis was known throughout the 1950s and 1960s for consuming pills that gave him superhuman energy. And when he combined those pills with the whiskey he drank before performances, the result was a performer who existed in a state of controlled explosion. A CBS camera operator who worked Lewis's Sullivan appearances described feeling the heat coming off that man from 10 feet away, saying his eyes were enormous and he was sweating before the first note, and that once he started playing, it was like watching someone channel lightning through a piano. Sullivan watched Lewis with fascination and alarm because Lewis brought younger viewers to a show that skewed older, but he was also a performer Sullivan could not control. And when he was chemically enhanced, which according to backstage witnesses was most of the time, his unpredictability became genuinely dangerous. During one appearance, Lewis kicked his piano bench so hard it slid across the stage and nearly hit a camera. And during another, he stood up on the piano itself without any rehearsal, which sent the crew scrambling to adjust cameras on live television, while Sullivan's stone expression tightened just slightly around the jaw in the only visible sign that he was watching his organized show descend into beautiful chaos. No permanent ban ever came for Lewis because his performances were undeniably spectacular television. He was wild. He was almost certainly on something every time he performed, and he remained one of the most electrifying things Sullivan's audience ever witnessed. Number 4. Janice Joplin. The blues queen who brought whiskey to Sunday night. Janice Joplin was not the kind of performer the Ed Sullivan Show was built for, because Sullivan's stage had launched the clean-cut Beatles and the wholesome Supremes, and Joplin was something else entirely. Raw, loud, emotionally exposed, and absolutely terrifying in her intensity. Her relationship with Southern Comfort whiskey was never a secret, music, and was practically part of her brand, because she was photographed with a bottle so often that the company reportedly sent her a fur coat as a thank you for the free advertising. She drank on stage, backstage, and in the car on the way to the venue. And according to people close to her, there was rarely a moment during her professional life when Joplin was entirely sober. Her Sullivan appearance was no exception. And a crew member who was backstage that night recalled the scene before she went on, describing her pacing around like a caged animal with glassy and unfocused eyes, singing to herself in these little broken pieces of melody that sounded like she was warming up and falling apart at the same time. Everyone music, backstage, knew she was not sober, and the only question was how far gone she actually was. What followed when she walked out under those lights was one of the most intense performances the show had ever broadcast. Because Joplin did not simply sing, she detonated. And her voice cracked and soared and screamed in ways that Sullivan's microphones had never captured before, leaving everyone unsure whether they were witnessing brilliance or a breakdown. Sullivan's reaction was characteristically unreadable, and he applauded politely when she finished, just as he did for every performer. But crew members noted that he did not approach Joplin afterward, which was unusual because Sullivan typically made a point of personally thanking his performers' music, and that silence spoke louder than words. Joplin died of an overdose on October 4th, 1970, at the age of 27. And her Sullivan appearance remains one of the most raw moments in the show's entire history. Because whether that rawness was enhanced by substances is a question that answers itself for anyone who knows the life she was living at the time. Number 3. Jim Morrison, the poet who looked Ed Sullivan in the eye and sang the forbidden word. On Music, September 17, 1967, the Doors appeared on The Ed Sullivan Show to perform their #1 hit, Light My Fire. And they were the hottest band in America, appearing on the biggest platform in television, which should have been a straightforward triumph, except for one problem. The song contained the lyric, "Girl, we couldn't get much higher." And Sullivan's producers wanted that word gone. 15 minutes before the show went live, Sullivan visited the Doors in their dressing room, told them they looked great, and suggested they smile more. And shortly after he left, a producer came in to deliver the real message, which was that the word higher had to go because the network considered it a reference to substances and suggested replacing it with girl. We couldn't get much better. Morrison was furious, and the band told the producer they would make the change. But the moment the producer walked out, Morrison turned to his bandmates and said 5 words that would become legendary. "We are not changing a word." When the Doors took the stage that night, Morrison performed People Are Strange. First singing with what a camera operator later described as a vacant look in his eyes with dilated pupils and slow, deliberate movements, staring into the lights between lyrics as if he was seeing something beyond the studio walls that nobody else in the room could see. And then came Light My Fire, and the band launched into the song, and Morrison sang it exactly as it had been written. And when the moment arrived, he looked directly into the camera and delivered the forbidden lyric with deliberate emphasis, while guitarist Robbie Kager was caught on camera with a quick smirk and the live audience screamed. And backstage, Sullivan's producers erupted. After the performance, Sullivan was seen clapping politely and mouthing the words, "That was wonderful," to maintain his composure for the cameras. But the moment the broadcast ended, the fury backstage was immediate and total. A producer confronted the band and told them Sullivan had planned to book them for 6 more appearances and that music deal was now dead because they would never perform on The Ed Sullivan Show again. Morrison's response became the stuff of rock and roll legend when he reportedly shrugged and said, "Hey man, we just did The Sullivan Show." The Doors were open about their regular substance use, and Morrison's vacant stare and dilated pupils during the performance are consistent with someone under the influence. But Morrison was also a natural provocateur who might have delivered that same performance completely sober simply because he refused to let anyone tell him what to sing. The consequence was immediate and permanent because the Doors were banned from The Ed Sullivan Show and never appeared again. And Morrison would be found dead in a bathtub in Paris less than 4 years later at the age of 27, leaving behind a performance that remains one of the most defiant moments in television history. Broadcast live to 50 million Americans by a man whose eyes suggested he was somewhere else entirely. Number 2, the Rolling Stones, the band that made Sullivan regret saying yes. When the Rolling Stones first appeared on The Ed Sullivan Show in 1964, they were already the dangerous alternative to the clean-cut Beatles. Because where the Beatles smiled, the Stones sneered, and where the Beatles wore matching suits, the Stones looked like they had slept in their clothes. Their first appearance was rowdy enough that Sullivan temporarily banned them. After the audience reaction grew so loud, he feared actual damage to his studio because the Stones played louder than rehearsed, moved more aggressively than planned, and radiated contempt for the buttoned-up television establishment Sullivan represented. By the mid to late 1960s, the Rolling Stones sat at the center of the counterculture, sweeping through rock and roll music. Keith Richards was developing habits that would follow him for decades. Brian Jones was consuming a cocktail of substances that would contribute to his death in 1969 at 27. And Mick Jagger moved through the era's excesses with the confidence of a man who feared nothing and nobody, including Ed Sullivan himself. During their Sullivan appearances, the band was required to change lyrics. The network considered music too suggestive, which is how Let's Spend the Night Together became Let's Spend Some Time Together. And Jagger complied on camera but rolled his eyes visibly while singing the changed lyric, music, to make it clear to everyone watching exactly what he thought of the censorship. A crew member described the atmosphere backstage as two different worlds colliding, with Sullivan's crew in their press shirts timing everything to the second on one side, and the Stones and their entourage on the other looking like they had just walked out of a very long party. And the smell alone told you everything you needed to know about what had been happening before the show. Sullivan needed them because they brought young viewers to his aging show. And they needed him because his stage was still the most powerful platform in television. But the mutual discomfort was always visible. After one particularly intense appearance, Sullivan reportedly told his producer that he was not sure what exactly those boys were on, but whatever it was, he did not want it anywhere near his studio again. And the Stones came back anyway and brought whatever they wanted with them. Number 1. Buddy Hackett. The comedian Sullivan could never quite trust. Buddy Hackett appeared on The Ed Sullivan Show numerous times and was considered one of the most reliable comedy bookings for years thanks to a round face, a gap-toothed grin, and timing that made him a natural fit for television. He was also, according to virtually everyone who worked with him, a man who could not be trusted to show up entirely sober. His reputation for performing under the influence was one of the worst-kept secrets in show business, because the clean material he performed on television was a carefully maintained illusion. And the real Buddy Hackett, the one audiences saw in Las Vegas at midnight, was profane, unpredictable, music, and frequently under the influence of something. The challenge for Sullivan's team was that Hackett existed in a permanent gray zone where he never stumbled or slurred so badly that the audience at home could tell something was wrong. But backstage, the people who worked with him could always tell because his eyes would be slightly too bright, his energy slightly too elevated, and his willingness to deviate from rehearsed material increased in direct proportion to whatever he had consumed before the show. A talent coordinator described the routine that developed around him, explaining that someone would check on Buddy 30 minutes before a segment, and if he seemed alert and could repeat his planned material, he went on. But if he seemed too far gone, they had a backup plan to rearrange the show. And they used the backup plan more often than anyone would like to admit. Sullivan genuinely liked Hackett, and that made the whole situation harder, because he appreciated that the same chemical looseness that made Hackett a backstage liability was also what made him so spontaneously funny. But there were multiple occasions when Hackett's segment was shortened at the last minute because the team determined he was too impaired for a longer appearance. Music. Hackett would rehearse clean material in the afternoon and deliver it perfectly, but by airtime that same material would come out differently with a looser delivery and shifted timing. And occasionally, he would add lines that had not been in the rehearsal, and those additions were usually funnier than the planned material, which was precisely the problem because the funniest version of Buddy Hackett was also the most dangerous version for live family television. No formal band ever came because the precautions around him simply became a permanent part of the production routine. A quiet acknowledgement that one of their most beloved comedians could not be fully trusted to arrive in the condition the show required. A longtime stage manager summed it up years later by saying that Buddy was the funniest man on the planet and the most stressful booking on the show, and you never knew which Buddy you were going to get. What Ed Sullivan's stage really saw. 23 years Ed Sullivan ran his show with the discipline of a man who believed television had a responsibility to families, demanding professionalism and respect for his stage from every single performer who stepped into those lights. And yet Elvis, music, Presley arrived with a dependency already taking root before anyone recognized the music signs. Jackie Gleason arrived having consumed enough to put a smaller man on the floor and somehow delivered flawless performances every single time. Jerry Lee Lewis channeled whatever was in his system into performances so explosive they nearly destroyed the equipment. Janice Joplin brought her whiskey-soaked rawness onto the most conservative stage in America and left the audience too stunned to react. Jim Morrison looked Sullivan's producers in the eye, agreed to change a lyric, and then sang it exactly as written because he answered to nobody. The Rolling Stones carried an entire counterculture lifestyle onto a family variety show and dared Sullivan to say something about it. And Buddy Hackett showed up in a state that required his own protocol while remaining one of the most beloved music comedians in the show's history. Sullivan handled each of them differently, tolerating the ones who could still deliver and banning the ones who disrespected his stage. Music, and his approach was never about moral judgment, but about one simple question, which was whether this person, music, could perform on live television without embarrassing the 50 million families watching at home. This was not a late-night show where audiences expected edginess. This was Ed Sullivan's stage, the most watched, most trusted, most conservative platform in American entertainment. And some of the biggest names in show business walked onto that stage carrying secrets in their bloodstreams that would have ended the broadcast if Sullivan had known the full truth. Which revelation surprised you most? Did you know about these backstage secrets before today? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found this valuable, do not forget to like and subscribe for more untold stories from entertainment's hidden past. Thanks for watching. See you in the next.